Around a decade ago, a property developer in China started construction on what was supposed to be a mega metropolis in the southern waters of Malaysia. Today, that project has been dubbed a mega ghost city. Only 15% of its skyscrapers and land spaces have been built, and there are hardly any humans in sight. What on earth went wrong here? And will this $100 billion project ever be completed? I'm your host, Regis, and today I'm going to tell you the bizarre story of Forest City, China's $100 billion ghost city. Malaysia, let's travel back to 2013, the year China unveiled its Belt and Road Initiative. This massive infrastructure project, still ongoing, aims to connect China with the entire world and create what some are calling the New Silk Road. A year later, in 2014, China's largest property developer, Country Garden, began constructing its $100 billion mega project, Forest City, in Malaysia as part of this initiative. Why Malaysia? Country Garden believes that Malaysia could become the gateway to the Southeast Asian region, much like Dubai is for the Middle East today. The project was set in the southern region of the Malaysian state of Johor, where Country Garden's vision was to build a futuristic metropolis on 4 artificial islands. The plan included luxury skyscrapers, waterways, fine restaurants, golf courses, vertical green spaces, and fancy hotels, along with commercial and residential facilities. The idea was to create an ideal living environment with access to elite international boarding schools and colleges. The islands were also meant to be equipped with top-notch security, including surveillance drones and security patrols to keep the residents safe. That sounds a bit extreme to me, but I guess some people are into that kind of Big Brother surveillance. The 4 man-made islands were originally supposed to span an area of 30 square kilometers, about twice the size of Los Angeles International Airport. At the time the project was conceived, China was in the middle of a property boom, with investments flowing into middle-class properties both locally and abroad. Country Garden aimed to transform Forest City into an eco-friendly, tech-savvy space, designed to house around 1 million people from all over the world. Now, let's fast forward to 2023. Only around 15% of the project has been completed, and just 1% of the development has actually been occupied. It seems that these numbers haven't changed much over time. Of the 4 islands, only 1 has started construction, and it's still unfinished. Out of the approximately 700,000 apartments originally planned, only about 26,000 are done. The project is so far behind schedule that Country Garden has defaulted on nearly $200 billion in debt. Forest City has essentially become a ghost town. Today, the island's beaches are deserted, and most of the shops and restaurants are closed. The mall is mostly abandoned, and vacant construction sites add to the eerie feeling of this supposed island of the future. The busiest place in Forest City seems to be the duty-free shop that was added in 2016, aimed at boosting popularity and attracting tourists. But most visitors come only to buy tax-free cigarettes and alcohol, and almost none actually live in Forest City. The island becomes pitch dark at night, apart from the occasional light in a window, as there are hardly any residents in the apartment units. Yet Country Garden claims to have sold 80% of their completed apartments. When asked, the company refused to comment on how many people actually live in those sold units. And as if that wasn't enough, you can't even swim at the island's deserted beach due to warnings of crocodiles. So yeah, not exactly an attractive investment by the looks of it. We're no experts, but perhaps they should have completed the project, or at least finished the first island, before moving people into this ghost city. This seems to follow China's signature build it, and they will come strategy, which assumes people will flock to a place as long as there are buildings to occupy. However, quite a few of these developments have ended up as ghost towns, much like Forest City. This ambitious mega project was initially sold as a dream paradise for all mankind, but the selling prices for these properties were simply out of reach for the average Malaysian citizen. In 2017, the apartment price at Forest City started at $170,000, yet the average price of a house in Johor back then was just under $60,000. This led many to speculate who Forest City was really for. It sure seemed like it was catering more to Chinese property investors than locals. People from China could pump their money into Forest City, secure a second home abroad, and make some extra income by renting it out. At least that was the plan the marketers were selling to Chinese citizens. In 2015, speculative buyers from China were flown in to get their hands on some pre-sale Forest City apartments that hadn't even been built yet. By 2017, Country Garden revealed that of the 20,000 apartments they had planned to construct in the next 3 years, 75% had been sold to people from mainland China, while only 10% were snatched up by Malaysians and buyers from neighboring Singapore. Two main factors would end up hampering this selling drive: politics and a global pandemic. Just as buyers from China were starting to have their pick of the Forest City properties, the Chinese government decided that too much money was flowing out of China. In 2017, at the height of Forest City sales, China began imposing capital controls that would prevent citizens from moving more than $50,000 out of the country each year. Given that the minimum price of Forest City apartments was $170,000 back then, sales soon began to plummet. A year later, things got even worse when the Malaysian government decided to impose restrictions on visas for citizens from mainland China, which had a dramatic effect on sales and caused Country Garden's stock price to drop. In October 2018, just over a year later, disaster struck again with the advent of COVID-19 and travel restrictions worldwide, making it even more difficult for potential buyers to purchase property they couldn't even visit. Of course, we can't talk about this failed project without mentioning China's housing bubble. After years of borrowing boatloads of cash to invest in property development, China had to start rolling out stricter borrowing limits in 2021. This naturally caused construction and development pockets to dry up and projects to stall, including those of Country Garden, which is currently trying to avoid liquidation. To give you an idea of how bad things are, Country Garden is now in serious trouble. Investors who already bought apartments in Forest City are now seeing their property values drop by up to 40%. The price range for buying apartments in Forest City today spans from $75,000 to nearly $5 million. Besides economics, politics, and pandemics, there were even more factors that hampered the sale of this not-so-futuristic metropolis. One of them was the location. The fact that Forest City is pretty isolated and far from Johor's capital city proved to be a tough selling point for investors and tenants alike. Currently, there's only one road connecting Forest City to the mainland, and that road collapsed in 2023 due to a sinkhole. Maintenance workers were left stranded on the island for days while the road was being rebuilt. The project also had to contend with inevitable construction delays and environmental issues. Back in 2014, Country Garden was just starting to dump giant trucks of sand into the sea to build their first island when operations came to a complete halt. It turned out that the company hadn't done any of the necessary environmental impact assessments that they said they would. This is pretty ironic, considering Country Garden touted their green metropolis as an eco-friendly, low-pollution offshore city. Local stakeholders and Malaysia's neighbor Singapore raised concerns over the lack of land reclamation permits, as well as worries about the impact on marine wildlife and the security of fish stocks in the Johor Straits region. It took months for officials to complete the environmental assessment and for construction to resume. Still, the local seagrass and mangrove habitats have been all but destroyed as the project kept dumping sand into the sea to extend the shoreline and create artificial land. And the environmental destruction didn't stop there. One of the 3 planned golf courses of Forest City was built on top of a large mangrove in the Rama Reserve. Granted, it looks pretty cool, but the loss of mangroves means a huge loss of biodiversity for the entire area. While there have been many environmental concerns, there are at least some eco-wins for Forest City. The vertical green walls that cover almost every building not only help lower air pollution, but also shade the buildings, keeping them cooler during the hotter months. The buildings are also prefabricated at a construction industrialization base nearby. This building method can greatly reduce both water and energy consumption. In fact, compared to traditional cast-in-place construction methods, prefabricating these buildings can save up to 50% on water and 70% on construction waste. Forest City also boasts an impressive water recycling system, with most of the water used for greening the parks and buildings coming from reclaimed water. So with all of this in mind, what does the future look like for this once promising mega project? The project prior to the COVID-19 outbreak had its completion date for Forest City set to be somewhere in the mid-2030s. Today, there is no clear indication as to when the project will be completed, if at all. Despite its dire status, there still seems to be hope for reviving Forest City. Investors are still actively being sought, but instead of focusing solely on the Chinese market, buyers from the Middle East, Indonesia, and Thailand are now actively being scouted. Malaysia's government today is also much more supportive of the project as they hold a 40% financial stake in the development of Forest City. The country's current Prime Minister, Anwar Ibrahim, wants to offer potential residents multi-entry visas, a flat rate income tax of 15%, and create a financial zone within the mega city. Moreover, the Sultan of Johor has promised a high-speed railway that will not only link the Malaysian capital Kuala Lumpur with Singapore, but will also stop at Forest City, making it much more attractive for potential residents. Since its original conception, the project has been scaled down to around half of its original size. While Country Garden has some serious financial issues, they remain adamant that Forest City could be completed. As they told the New York Times in October 2024, the blueprint for Forest City will not change. Reasonable development and construction will be carried out according to demand. However, if Country Garden, which is currently being sued by creditors in Hong Kong, ends up going bankrupt, the future of Forest City will remain uncertain. So, what do you think? Will this project ever actually be completed? Can Forest City bounce back? Share your thoughts with us in the comments down below. As always, thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.